Ruth. It gives me great pleasure to welcome you here tonight, in addition to Ruth's welcome. As Ruth said, I've been working with the Sequoia Park Zoo's Conservation Advisory Committee for 12 years. And I think this must be I thought this was our 13th lecture series. Yeah, oh, it's 2011, so it's 13 years. We've been holding, we've been hosting these lectures, and it's been a lot of fun for me to be a part of this committee, as well as helping to organize the series. We all do a lot of work on the committee, and we use our connections to find researchers in the community that we think this community would like to, and that community would like to hear about. Very often it's local work, sometimes it's international work, and I invite you to have a look at that calendar because we have an amazing lineup of speakers. Last month we had the director of the Red Panda Network speak, and we're red pandas, go figure. We're going to hear about whales, and then next month we have marbled murrelets, and then the next month we have, what's on the calendar? Bears? That's right, those are my students. And then we've got butterflies, so there's a lot of great stuff on the lineup, so please join us every month as often as you can. So, without further ado, it also gives me great pleasure to introduce tonight's speaker, Robyn Norman, who's going to be talking to us about gray whale foraging behavior. And Robyn is a graduate student at Cal Poly Humboldt, and she is advised by a couple of amazing scientists who are also here tonight, Don Goley and Paul Bordeaux. Don has given a talk here at the lecture series just a few years back. I jokingly say that it was very early in our, probably 10 years back, very early in our time here. And so great biologists who are doing marine work and marine mammal work. And so Robyn's got some great foundations to work from. And she's been here in the Department of Biology for 2 years, a little over 2 years, studying the gray whale foraging ecology, which she'll tell you about. But she's no stranger to the gray whales because before she came here, she was working at Oregon State. Well, she did her undergraduate at Oregon State, also watching gray whales in Oregon, originally from Portland, Oregon. So she hasn't come too far, come far down a little bit south to watch the gray whales. And the other wonderful thing, here's my pitch for what Ruth was talking about, coming full circle. Robyn was a recipient of one of our conservation grants. So as Ruth mentioned, and the slideshow was going, funding that we get from the community and through entrance fees and so forth goes to supporting in situ conservation. And we were so happy to just contribute a little bit to Robyn's work. So we invited her to come tell us about what she does. Thanks for coming, Robyn. Welcome.
Thank you so much to everyone for coming. At first, and thank you for that wonderful introduction. I first want to start off my talk by first thanking, of course, the Sequoia Park Zoo and Foundation. This was actually one of the first grants I received for my research about 2.5 years ago, as I said. And again, I just want to thank them for their continued support and inviting me out today. So I think that's the first time I said thank you. But anyways, that pretty much covered everything about me. I tried. Again, I graduated from Cal Poly Humboldt from Portland, and I did my undergraduate at Oregon State University, where I also studied gray whales. And the last one on here is that I am a self-proclaimed friend of the whales. So it's a little bit of like a one-sided friendship. They don't know who I am or know about me, but I know them, so it works. Self-proclaimed. But today I just want to take you through an introduction to whales. And when I say that, I mean from an evolution standpoint to when they're, I guess, introduced on Earth, as well as current whales that we have here, including baleen whales, a little bit into gray whales and what foraging research looks like, and then talk about some of the connections of conservation that we can figure. So the first thing, again, is that introduction to whales from an evolutionary standpoint. Now, the first ancestors of whales are quite different from those that we see today. So dating back to over 50 million years ago. So these are land-based mammals. And particularly, you can see sort of the whale I suppose, and their elongated skull. And so we think that these descendants likely gravitated to sort of semi-aquatic environments. And we think they either were seeking refuge from larger predators or becoming predators themselves and finding food. So this is sort of the next step in evolution, a little bit more scarier in my opinion. But this is 42 million years ago, where there were mass migrations of these early cetaceans, becoming more aquatic based. You see a fluke-like tail down at the bottom there, web feet, really supporting them in the aquatic environment. And we also see the beginning of use of suction in this photo here, like we see our baleen whales doing today. Now, I guess you could say more recently, but this is about 4.5 million years ago. The size of the whales that we know today really came to fruition, such as the gray whale, compared to that boat that you see there at the top. But we know that based on the fossil record in these fossils, that gray whales actually, or whales in general, share an ancestor with four-legged, ungulates, or even-toed hoofed animals. And this includes land mammals like hippos, cows, and giraffes. So that's just a little bit of an introduction to whales. And so now I'm just going to move into the whales that we see today. So what is a baleen whale? So baleen whales are mysocetes, are cetaceans that have keratin plates, that's like our fingernails, our skin, and our teeth. And they filter large quantities of prey and food from the water or from the benthos. And this can include things like small plankton, fish, and other small organisms. Now, most baleen whales also undergo a pretty extensive migration and have a large area along our coastline where they can be found. So unlike toothed whales, baleen whales cannot use sonar or echolocation, but many species of the humpbacks have different types of songs or vocalizations that we know today. Baleen whales also have two blowholes when they breathe, so the water coming out of them sort of looks like a heart that you see in that picture now, right? We can further look at the differences in the baleen of these whales to see the different types of food they are consuming. So for example, this is the humpback whale here on the left, and humpback whales use their very large mouths and baleen to bring in larger prey like krill as well as small fish. And so this is again another picture of a humpback whale. And we can see that the large grooves on their lower jaw allow their mouths to expand and take in more fish, water, prey, all of that yummy goodness through behaviors like lunge feeding as well as bubble feeding. And so we think that an average size humpback whale can hold anywhere between 5,000 and 6,000 gallons of water in its mouth. So whereas gray whales, a little bit different. So they have shorter, coarser, thick baleen plates, and they will filter through the sand and mud, so less in the water column for those fish. And they'll eat things like these smaller amphipods, I also call them like the ocean's roly-poly, and other small invertebrates as well. So we do have quite a few different types of baleen whale. The fin whale, the gray whale, and the common minke whale. Now out of these bunch, as well as the humpback whale, but out of these bunch, we typically see these four: the gray whale, the common minke whale, the blue whale, and the humpback, with minkies being quite a bit smaller and quite a bit faster and harder to see. Now we also do have toothed whales on our coastline. So this is different from baleen whale, as sort of self-explanatory, they have teeth. So this includes orcas, dolphins, porpoise. And these whales will eat a variety of other food types than the baleen whales, like larger fish, maybe other marine mammals, and large invertebrates as well. So toothed whales are characterized by the presence of teeth, a single blowhole, as well as a forehead area called the melon. Now these species of whale are capable of echolocation that can be used for navigation, find food, and also avoid predators. Odontocetes, or toothed whales again, eat a variety of prey like marine mammals, that could be seals and sea lions, fish, and even squids. So now I want to jump into what you're probably all here to talk about today, a little bit of an extended history of gray whales and what this species is doing in Northern California. So this is an example of a gray whale next to an elephant and a scuba diver, I suppose. But gray whales are identified by their dorsal ridge, a lack of a dorsal fin there on their back, as well as the heart-shaped whale that I talked about. So gray whales are typically 40 to 50 feet long and can weigh over 7,000 pounds. Gray whales are the only species of baleen whale that we know of that will eat in the benthic or the ocean floor. And gray whales are estimated to live up to 70 years, with each different whale having unique pigmentation, scars, and even body shape. So these gray whales exist today in two separate populations. Specifically, the Eastern Pacific population along our coastline were hunted to near extinction in the mid-1800s and again in the early 1900s. So commercially overhunted, specifically in their breeding and foraging grounds, which I'll talk about next. And these whales were used, or these whalers used floating factories or ships, as this example shown here, to process these whales out at sea and not bring them into port. So essentially just harvesting more whales over time. So these gray whales were also once nicknamed the devilfish, but not probably for the reason that you think. So these whales were nicknamed the devilfish due to their aggression towards whalers. So gray whales were otherwise easy targets as they were in nearshore waters, but they did put up a fight. Now we do have a local whaling station, or we used to at least, and this was the Trinidad Whaling Station, operated and opened from 1920 to 1926. And during this 6-year period, these whalers captured over 1,140 whales, most of them being humpbacks and fin whales. There's one blue whale here, and also one gray whale. And so essentially what is left of this structure today are these blocks down under the pier that you can see during live time. So again, whales were commercially hunted for some of their byproducts, and this includes oil and lamps, protein and vitamin supplements, dyeing and corsets, and even their baleen was used for weaving baskets as well. But now today, thankfully, gray whales and other marine mammals are protected by the Marine Mammal Protection Act, as well as the Endangered Species Act. So the Marine Mammal Protection Act of 1972 prohibits the take of marine mammals. So this is just essentially including harassment, hunting, capturing, as well as killing a marine mammal in US waters by any US citizen. So the Endangered Species Act of 1973 also protects threatened and endangered species in the United States. So there are two different populations of gray whales that still exist today. The first I want to share with you is the North Pacific population. And so the North Pacific, or the Western North Pacific population, have historically migrated along the coast of Russia, Korea, China, and Japan, and were thought to be extinct and essentially decimated by commercial whaling up to the 1970s. So today this population is only about 150 to 200 individuals, and these whales are typically found in Russia, but they do face new challenges like offshore oil as well as gas development. So here on the West Coast, we do see the other population, or the Eastern North Pacific population. So this population makes the longest yearly migration of any mammal, traveling over 16,000 kilometers round trip. So these whales will spend the summer in traditional foraging grounds in the Bering and Chechen Seas, that's up there in the green. And then they will travel south for the winter into some of those yellow dots there, and that's going to be Baja California, Mexico. And so today, this population is around 15,000 individuals, so quite a bit more. But regardless of population, gray whales will feed opportunistically. So this just essentially means that if there's food, a gray whale will take it, essentially, or eat it. So both in the water column as well as sifting through mud, as you see here, they use their baleen to essentially look for different types of invertebrates, as I'll show you in the next few slides. And so these gray whales will turn to one side, as you can see on the bottom there, push baleen or push invertebrates through their baleen, and then exit the sand and mud. And so some whales over time can actually lose their eyesight, as they do have a dominant side, like our left and right hand, and just all that mud and sediment in their eye can make them go blind. But they're okay, I swear. So a lot of these species, as I said, can be found in a variety of places in their habitat. And this can lead to different types of foraging and foraging behaviors. So some species of prey live throughout the water column. That's the one I have up here for you, this planktonic prey. And so they can either spend most of their life or part of their life in this free moving state, sort of at the mercy of the wind and currents. Now we also have epibenthic prey, and these typically are species that will live just above or on the bottom sediment, and these species are usually associated with either a rocky reef or a kelp forest. And lastly, we also have some of those benthic species that I was telling you about, where gray whales will filter through the sand and mud to get these organisms. So while in these northern foraging grounds, so they're still up in the Chesapeake and Bering Seas, gray whales will consume a variety of different types of invertebrates, like mice and shrimp, amphipods, crustaceans, and marine worms. Now, I may be embarrassing my mom a little bit, but she always asks me, oh, are mice and shrimp the one that you get, in the Costco, cocktail shrimp containers? And I can tell you that they're a lot smaller and probably less tastier than you imagine. So in the past, scientists have reported that dense mats of amphipods, like I showed you, or mice and shrimp, are found littered across the ocean floor or in giant swarms for all these gray whales to consume. So typically, these are some visual representations of the species, but typically these species are thought to be both high calorie, that's your fire symbol there, as well as high abundance, or with the money, like money. However, recent changes to the food base may have led to larger changes in the population. So this is one of 3 graphs that I'll show you. But on the bottom here, we have years starting in 1968 all the way to 2024. And then on this vertical axis here, we have the number of whales in the Eastern North Pacific population from 0 to 30,000. And so we can see over time that there's been some high peaks, there's been a couple of lows over there, with the population topping out at over 27,000 individuals in 2016. Additionally, each blue bar that you see is an unusual mortality event, or UME. And UMEs, or unusual mortality events, are typically declared when there is a higher than average number of deaths or strandings of a population. So today there are 5 active marine mammal UMEs, including harbor seals, manatees, humpback whales, as well as our gray whales. Now the cause of these UMEs can vary between the species, but they can be attributed to environmental factors like loss of food or to human interaction like ship strike. So again, going back to this graph, we can see that gray whales have gone through 2 UMEs, the first being in 1999 to 2000, and the second UME starting in 2019. However, the official reason for this most recent UME in 2019 has yet to be decided, but scientists do have a few ideas. But before I do that, a little segue here, I'm going to take you back to 2016 when those gray whales were at the height of their population. Now, I don't know about you, but in 2016, I was in high school. I was 16 and 17 years old, and a couple things that were big in pop culture for that year was the Cubs won the World Series. There was the Harambe incident at a zoo, that's not this one, as well as Beyonce released her award-winning album, Lemonade. So again, I was in high school, this is me doing a sport, I swear it's a sport, it's called dragon boats, and that's me in the corner there, paddling like really hard, essentially. So for the gray whales, 2016, their reality did not include dragon boats, the World Series, or I guess Beyonce, you could say. But instead, from 2014 to 2016, a period of warming at the ocean surface, termed the blob, combined with the ocean warming from an El Nino, resulted in the largest marine heat wave on record for the North Pacific. Now, marine heat waves can have major consequences for both sea life and human beings, and this includes loss of the food web, quality of habitat, and even mass mortalities. So gray whales are likely experiencing this reality, less Beyonce, more food loss. And we see that through the collapse of the main prey item, again, in these northern foraging grounds, specifically looking at these amphipods or the benthic roly-poly I was showing you earlier. So talking through this figure, we first have sea ice melt. We think this is due to the warming of our oceans, and our sea ice cover is also drastically declining for the past couple of years. Now, because this sea ice is melting, we have extremely important algae and phytoplankton on the underside of the sea ice, and that is going to feed and fall to the ground to feed our little roly-poly amphipods. However, with less sea ice and less surface area for the algae to grow, the amphipods on the ocean floor are not receiving the food source that they once had, and these amphipods may begin to die, either become smaller or potentially both. Now this leaves a food base that cannot support that 27,000 individuals that I talked about earlier that enter these foraging grounds every summer. Now, to put this in human terms, at least I'm going to try to, if you or anyone that you know bodybuilds, getting ready for your next competition can include eating things that would want to make you big and strong. And that includes both high quality and high quantity food. However, relate this back to gray whales and think about their situation. Instead of those healthy foods that we're talking about, those protein-rich foods, I'm now only going to give you a tortilla chip, maybe some nuts, and maybe an egg. But in actuality, many of the once abundant species are disappearing, or at least existing in low abundance. You see that one side going down. And even the food base in secondary or tertiary feeding grounds where these gray whales are going is also declining. So with these struggles, an ever-changing environment, and just a lot of whales up in those foraging areas, there is a different group of gray whales that have a completely different strategy and do not make the full migration. So this group is called the Pacific Coast Feeding Group. And so these whales do not complete that full migration that we talked about. So this is the map that we saw earlier, and go into the Bering HSGC that we see in the blue and green. But instead, we'll spend the summer, typically from June to November, feeding in Vancouver Island, BC, and southeastern Alaska, to right here in Northern California. So that's that red dot that I'm showing you, and then Northern California is there in the yellow square. Now, the PCFG make up less than 1% of this larger population, and there are only about 230 individuals in this group. Now, we know that this group is very small through methods like photo identification, as each whale, as I was talking about, has unique pigmentation, but also scarring from either barnacles, whale lice, or some sort of human interaction. So PCFG whales have been studied in Northern California for over 20 years and have been identified using photo ID. So in these photos, taken at the time by Humboldt State Master's student Ryan Dickinson, as well as my advisor, Tanzoli, who's in the house today. If we look at the middle and bottom photos, we can see that this is the left and the right side of a single whale. We can see that just looking at the pigmentation, we can see it's very different from side to side. And typically, these whales as well can be seen over months, days, or even years. But now when we think of the individuals that just travel to the northern foraging grounds, coupled with the decreasing availability of prey, as well as just the high number of whales that are going up to Alaska and the Bering Sea. And we think this may be a trade-off with the prey available in these newer, shortened foraging grounds. So this is a recently published article by the Gem Lab at Oregon State University, where we can see that PCFG whales are typically both shorter and smaller than those of the larger population. Now, there may be multiple explanations for this difference, including some sort of trade-off or adaptation to the environment or with their food. So while these gray whales are in Oregon and Washington, these whales are consuming a typically higher abundance in caloric prey than they do in Northern California. So this includes things like herring eggs, ghost shrimp, crab larvae, amphipods, as well as mysid shrimp. So while you may be seeing some overlap in the type of prey, like those mysid shrimp and amphipods, these do vary by species and across foraging grounds between both the PCFG range and the northern foraging locations. So in Northern California, or the North Coast, as I've termed it, so Northern California gray whales are likely consuming a different array of invertebrates, like amphipods and cetaceans, as well as these cumation. Now, before I came to Humboldt, I never even heard of a cumation. I've been in the gray whale game for a couple of years at that point. But cumations or hooded shrimp are typically found in soft bottom habitats like sod and like mud and sand. And with more than 1,500 species, these arthropods are rarely found anywhere else in the PCFG home range. So these cumations have only been found in 2 locations, the first being Northern California, and then the other location being in Kodiak Island, Alaska, so pretty far north. And at Kodiak Island, we know that these prey are found in high abundances or quantity, but calorically or calorie-wise, they are very low quality compared to other food options out there. Now, most of this information on the species coming from Kodiak Island, Alaska, we do have an issue. If this species is the dominant prey item in Northern California, we are still unsure about what their quality and quantity actually looks like, and are probably missing key information that tells us how gray whales are faring in Northern California overall. So based on this information and gaps in our knowledge of gray whales, we can ask some of the following questions and hopefully answer them with gray whale research. So that being, what are gray whales eating in Northern California? Where are the gray whales foraging? How does their prey quality and quantity change, both over space and over time? And how does this compare to other foraging locations? So what does foraging research in Northern California look like? So in Northern California, we get to survey over 100 kilometers of coastline, ranging all the way from Trinidad, so just 30 minutes from here, to Crescent City and Point St. George, pretty close to the Oregon border. So research dating back to Ryan Jenkinson in 2001, and as well as the 1980s, have shown us that areas like Trinidad, Wedding Rock, the Klamath River mouth, as well as Point St. George, are important biologically for these gray whales in Northern California. So we also surveyed for more than half the year. So while a small number of PCFG whales are likely found in Northern California all year round, we surveyed primarily from that April to December date. So hopefully this encompasses those migratory whales moving north in April and May, PCFG individuals from June to November, and migratory whales also showing up in December. So during this period, we have observed whales foraging in all 4 of our locations. And to look at these behaviors and the food base specifically, we deploy a variety of different prey collection methods to see which species of invertebrates they are consuming. So this is a visual representation of what me and some of my undergraduate volunteers look like out in the field. I think they're really stylish. But we survey gray whales in 2 different ways. The first by land and then by sea. So gray whales do stay pretty close to shore, especially during some of those foraging times. And some of the whales can come within a kilometer of our walkable beaches to feed and roll in the mud. Additionally, gray whales aren't particularly the fastest, I would say, of marine mammals, so they make a great species to keep from land if you're ever out there. So for my study, we have 6 land-based locations from Trinidad to Point St. George. We're on a weekly basis. Undergraduate volunteers and I, some of them here today, will collect spatial data to understand the behavior, habitat use, and distribution of these individuals. Now, Ashley didn't know I was going to put this picture in here, but by boat, we can also collect better photo identification of these individuals, detailed behavioral information, as well as the exact GPS location where these gray whales are foraging. So I'm going to bring you back to this slide just before I go on to the next sort of methods. But in addition to boat surveys, we also collect the food that these gray whales are eating. Now, as I mentioned earlier, gray whales are opportunistic foragers, meaning if there's food, they will eat. And this diversity of prey leads us to have a diversity in the methods we collect them with, as gray whales are not exclusively feeding on the floor. So to collect prey in the water column, we use a plankton net made of a very fine mesh. And when retrieved fast enough upwards through the water column, we can collect species of mysid, larval crabs, and amphipods, as you can see in these pictures. Now, on larger vessels, these nets can be used in a variety of different ways, including skimming the surface of the water, as well as lowering nets to a specific depth and collecting specific organisms at those depths. But some plankton nets, as you can see, can be over 7 feet long, fit multiple people inside. Mine's about very big. And then on larger vessels, as well, or at least for our benthic crabs, we lower this essentially tin box onto the floor. And once on the floor, the jaws of this crab will release, scooping up hopefully that top layer of sediment. So on the right, or I guess on your left, and is an example of how a larger jaw and how this mechanism is supposed to work. You can see that if it gets pulled up, those jaws will collapse. And on the right is what we use. So again, on larger ships, these benthic crabs can weigh thousands of pounds and collect thousands of organisms. But for us, again, it's a very frustrating small metal box, 6 by 6 by 6 inches, and that's me with a stand dollar, which I did not want. That's okay. And so we also use these same methods in the presence of foraging whales. And so we're hoping that any prey collected in the vicinity of these individuals represents what they're actually eating. So now I want to talk to you and just show you what the results of all of this effort can look like. Okay. So this is an example, very cute, of what we can collect in some of those benthic crabs. So we're sand and mud, like you see here on the left. And when we filter this with seawater, we can get amphipods, which is that large, roly-poly looking guy, as well as things like marine worms, even snails, once we filter that through. Now I also, it's a little distorted, that's fine. If we look really closely at this video here, we can also see that we are collecting plenty of chemations. Now those are those hooded shrimp that I talked about that I found in the sand and mud. And so we have found these really in high abundance across all 4 sites from Trinidad to Point St. George. There's probably over 100 chemations just in this small sample. Now what I want to show you next is just a visual representation of essentially a bunch of months of my research. And so this is the Klamath River mouth. You can see the mouth there down on the bottom right. And this is a known foraging location of gray whales. So each date that you see, I've circled May 18th, 2022, is significant as a gray whale sighting. And so these are data points from the boat surveys that I talked about. And so each different date that you see, the other one being September 27th, 2022, is a different gray whale or a different gray whale sighting. And so if we look at May 18th, the one circled at the top there, we can see that the line connecting all of those points has pink diamonds. And for my key, that shows that the gray whale is traveling. So if we look down at the river mouth at September 27th, 2022, you can see that that gray whale is likely foraging with those stars. And so you can see it's very, very close to the shoreline. So overlaid on top of all these data points are the different types of prey collection that I've talked about. So the plankton toe, those are toes of the water column. With that plankton net I talked about, circle down at the bottom. And with the orange plus signs, those are going to be benthic crabs. And so hopefully we can see with this map that some of those benthic crabs are very, very close to where we see those gray whales, either foraging or loitering, which is sort of a catch-all behavior where we're not exactly sure what they're doing, but they could be foraging in those locations. So hopefully, if we're just looking at this map, we can see that there are a wide variety of behaviors, different types of sampling going on, as well as this is over a couple of kilometers of space as well. Now, this is the second of 3 graphs I'm going to show you. And this shows you essentially all of those efforts of long land survey hours as well as boat survey hours. So it all comes down to a couple line graphs here. But on the bottom, we essentially have times such as June to November. That's that PCFG foraging period in Northern California, as I've talked about. And then on the vertical axis, we have whale presence, and I termed this whale seen per hour. And so if we look at the month of November, for example, we can see that we have an estimated 0.6 whales per hour. Now we can't see 0.6 of a whale. I don't know what that would mean for the whale, but meaning that if we were to go at any of our sites, across time, specifically in November, that we should see a whale about every hour and a half. And so largely, if you take anything away from this data, it's essentially telling us that PCFG whales are foraging in Northern California throughout their summer foraging period from June to November. Now, this is the last graph, and in my opinion, the most complicated graph. So I'll leave you with that. But we're just gonna walk through it, different sample by different sample. So again, this is looking at, now we're looking at food. And so when we look on the bottom, we still have time from June to November. And then on both of our vertical axes, we have either the planktonic samples that I've collected or those benthic samples. So the samples that are in the water column or the samples that were taken in the benthos or the seafloor. Now, if we look at our planktonic samples first, we can see that our range here is from 0 individuals to over 2,000. We can also see with this blue line, that they did peak in June. So that's going to be that first data point that we have. Now, after June, the invertebrates in our sample were pretty non-existent, comparatively. And then what also made up these samples? These are just some examples of things that you may find. So a lot of these are different species of larval crabs, porcelain crabs, Dungeness crabs even, as well as hermit crabs. And then we have our little larval shrimp down there at the bottom. So now when we switch axes and look at our benthic samples, those are the ones with our tin box, essentially, we can see that our range now goes from 1 to over 100,000. And so if we look at time again on the horizontal axis at the bottom, we can see that as time went on throughout our surveys, we were seeing that more and more organisms were in our samples, topping probably somewhere in the 50,000. So it's quite a lot more than those toad samples that topped out about 2,000. And so what made up these samples? So that primarily, it was the low calorie cremation there, that's in the middle. We also found a bunch of marine worms, snails, as well as our ocean woolly bullate organic pod. So when we look at this all together, so I've shown you examples of research that tell us when and what gray whales are foraging for. But overall, the results of this research could be used to create a baseline to essentially predict, hopefully, the future of the PCFG as well as the rest of the population. Now, we know that the population has been getting smaller, and we think this has to do with the prey shortages in those northern foraging grounds. So like the Eastern North Pacific population, where whales have shifted to secondary or even tertiary foraging grounds, it is possible that PCFG individuals may also shift northward, following that same pattern and potentially abandoning Northern California. So this is going to be especially important as PCFG whales are facing a lower quality and quantity of prey, especially that food-based Northern California. Their body size is smaller, their group size is also small, and the environment and the food does continue to change over time. But we're hoping that multi-year sampling, like we're doing with my thesis, and future analysis that I'll be doing, could provide evidence for this prediction or to the contrary, and further link any shifts in prey to these whales in Northern California. So now I want to leave you off with the different connections that we have with these gray whales and what conservation may look like. So what is our connection with gray whales? So as I talked about in the beginning, gray whales and other marine mammal species, especially in those zones, are highly impacted by a variety of different human interactions in their nearshore habitats. And so in the previous video that I showed you, I actually find this screen grab from that video very interesting. So this is a gray whale that we actually saw this year over the summer. And if we look really closely in the background, we can see that there's actually a line of cars there on the horizon. And so that is actually our 101 highway. So it is possible if you were going to Warwick, per se, if you were to look out your window, you would see either us, a giant orange boat, or you would see a whale, maybe both. But this essentially means that a lot of the human-related activities that are happening close to shore are also impacting the gray whales that we see. And this can include things like disturbance, entanglement, ship strike, or even pollution. So I just wanted to give pollution a little bit more detail. And so this is an article from OPB up in Oregon, and this actually details a study that I assisted with while at Oregon State University. And so essentially what we found is that through different types of identification of microplastics from samples that were similarly collected in Oregon, that gray whales in these foraging grounds, PCFG whales particularly, are consuming millions of microplastics every year. And so now that we know this, and on a lighter note, after everything that I've showed you today, what can cetacean and more specifically gray whale conservation look like? So the first thing, in my opinion, that is relatively easy is picking up your trash. So as I mentioned, the Zoo Microplastic Study suggests that gray whales are consuming a staggering amount of microplastics through the water column and in their food. So by reducing either single-use plastics or the amount of clothing and textiles where a lot of these fibers and fragments are coming from, we can reduce the amount of microplastics entering our ecosystem. Now we can also support community-led organizations that are willing to pick up this trash for us. And so this will further reduce the plastic that is entering our oceans. Next, we can responsibly share the water. So by law, you are required to stay 100 yards from any gray whale, and most likely any other marine mammal, and refrain from using maneuvers that either position yourself in front of a whale or in a way that you directly cross an individual. And this goes for most species, as I was saying. So by being closer than 100 yards to a whale, you're potentially not only endangering yourself, but also the individual. As many of these gray whales that we see at some point in their life did have some sort of human interaction, and we can see that through some of the scars that they have as well. So by following this federal law that requires you to use non-invasive maneuvers and stay at a respectable distance, you can both further reduce physical disturbance as well as the endangerment to you and the whale. Now we can also support your local marine mammal research, like me. So here in Humboldt County, the Cal Poly Humboldt Marine Mammal Education and Research Program responds to reports of dead stranded marine mammals in Del Norte, Humboldt, as well as North Mendocino counties. So any reports of marine mammals, so this includes things like sea lions and seals, as well as whales, if you do see one, are extremely important. And this data will allow us to collect really important information that helps us look at the health of our local marine mammal population. Okay, so this is an image from actually the NOAA Fisheries website that does give a broader range of ideas on what cetacean conservation can look like. So as we talked about, these are very similar ideas, including keeping your distance and reducing your speed. And this will help set an example for other boaters to protect you and the whale. You can also report local marine mammals in distress or stranded marine mammals to the Marine Mammal Education and Research Program at Cal Poly Humboldt. And if you see or witness any violations in safety or either federal law, there is also a 24/7 available hotline resource for you as well. Now these practices are especially true as PCFG whales we see from June to November, again, make up less than 1% of the population. I've also further shown you that poor food, smaller group size, smaller body size, as well as increases in human interaction, make them extremely vulnerable to humans, as well as the changing climate. But again, I do want to leave you on a lighter note than that. And I want to talk about some recent updates that we see in the Eastern North Pacific population. So while gray whales in these northern foraging grounds have declined, we have also been observing gray whales that are finding short-term solutions by moving farther north into the Arctic to find food. Further, we also know that body condition of gray whales, specifically in those wintering lagoons, so they've made that migration south, is also improving, including more calves being born as well, so an increase in the population. We also have seen that fewer gray whales have become stranded or have died along the west coast, and this has actually contributed to the closing of the unusual mortality event that we've had the past few years. So again, I just want to thank you all so much for coming today. This research would not be possible without the Sequoia Park Zoo conservation grant. As I said, it's the first one I got during my time at working at Humboldt State. I also want to thank CSU Coast, as well as NOAA, and my other contributors and funding sources from Cal Poly Humboldt. Now I also have a very large variety of lab mates, as well as research assistants. And I especially want to thank Alex and Louie, who have spent many, many hours out on the boat with me, as well as Ashley Jacob, who is not required to do any of that, but thank you so much. And I also want to talk and thank my research assistant. So these are undergraduate students who volunteer every single week to come and do samples for me, do surveys, spend their time hanging out with me. And so I do have a couple here today, so I just want to thank you so much for being a part of my project and helping me progress. And then lastly, I'd also like to thank Paul and Dawn. Thank you guys so much. And yeah, I've been here for 2.5 years and it's been a really great experience. But other than that, again, a big thank you to the Sequoia Park Zoo Foundation. Let's see, and thank you so much.
We'd love to ask some questions.
Yeah.
We have a couple minutes, if
Sure.
that's okay. You want to field questions yourself?
Sure.
Okay. And I can repeat questions. We have someone listening on Zoom, so they can let me know if they can't hear, and we'll repeat it if needed. Okay.
I'll start.
So I spent a lot of time in San Luis Obispo. We have that in Monterey County and San Luis Obispo, you know. And so if the whales here are seeing this bunch of a depletion in food, what's going on with them? And do you know?
Yeah, so I know that for the piece. So for the PCFG range, it is the southern edge is this area in Northern California. However, there definitely have been observations of gray whales feeding other places, like San Francisco Bay, for example. But I'd say at least foraging research in that regard is still working out its sort of kinks down there. And so we do know that these gray whales are probably and likely foraging outside of this range. But we're not exactly sure when or where. And as you saw, or if it didn't come across, a lot of these methods can be really hard, especially like an ethnograph, for example, to sort of operate. So it is possible that prey is decreasing in other locations and is changing, but I don't know if we necessarily have that information yet. And that would be like a really good thing to do next as well, sort of expand that range south as well. Yeah. Okay.
I can't get past grabbing a mouthful of dirt to eat dinner. How effective are they in weeding out the dirt? And then they've got to have some in their digestive system. How can they avoid getting blockages?
Yeah, so I think the baleen really helps with that. And in the research that I have some of my undergraduates doing where they're going through samples, we do have a cutoff where if the prey is under a certain size, we don't count it or don't include it in our analysis because we know those gray whales can filter through that. And so that's where some of those finer sand and mud particles would come into play. Hopefully they're filtering out. One thing that I've also noticed is that a lot of our habitats will have like really fine sand, silt, and mud, and then 20 feet next door will be like these fine little pebbles, and the larger things that you would think would get stuck. But in those samples, we have a lot of my undergraduates have probably noticed that we also don't, at least in the ethnograph samples, we haven't been finding a lot of inverts, and that's some of that larger sediment. So, we're thinking that maybe gray whales aren't foraging there, but we'll find softer sand and mud to do that with.
Can you sample their poop to see?
Yeah, we've been trying so hard for 2 years. We have been trying to get whale poop, and we think we saw one poop yesterday. We tried to skim the surface and get all of that poop and all of that surface sample. Ryan Jenkinson in 2001 did have poop samples as well, and I would have to look a little bit more into that about what they saw, but yeah, hopefully in the sample that we actually collected yesterday, we'll have a little bit more confirmation about what they're eating, bits and pieces.
How do you feel the wind farms are going to impact the whales?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So I think at least the wind farm and sort of the planning, we don't exactly know what that's going to look like in school. We do have examples of wind farms in other places, around the world or even in the United States. And what I found is that a lot of the construction of that wind farm, it might be offshore, and that use of Humboldt Bay, that may, cross paths with the gray whales, come back to that sort of thing. But in constructing this wind farm, there is a variety of sort of assessment impacts that we have to do either at a federal or state level. And so marine mammals will definitely be included in part of that. And those documents are open for public comment and like available on the internet. So yeah, hopefully if there are concerns, like environmental scientists or environmental lawyers, will most likely be commenting on those as well.
Because the turbines create a lot of impact with the sonars. I mean, they don't use sonar, but there is an impact because of the waves.
Yeah, that is sort of out of my realm of knowledge. But yeah, there definitely is possible if there's any sort of cables or anything like that in the water, there is a chance that marine mammal will become entangled. But yeah, I don't know the specifics of that engineering yet.
You said there was about 240 in our pod in our area. Can you tell them apart, and if so, are you numbered or named?
Yeah, so there is a couple of different catalogs along the West Coast that we have. So Cascadia Research Collective, I believe up in Olympia, Washington, has a very large catalog of these whales. It's also one that's being worked on at Oregon State, and we also have our own catalog here at Cal Poly Humboldt. So we definitely can tell them apart. We've definitely noticed whales that we've seen on multiple trips. So yesterday we saw one that Dawn and Allison called Quasimodo that has a very noticeable body shape. And so through those photographs, we're able to see them, maybe give them nicknames like that, that sort of thing. Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Through all of these agencies and collaborative work, we can sort of track them if we wanted to, like over time, over years. Yeah.
In your research, you mentioned how the whales are eating microplastics. Has there been any studies done on what the actual effects of them eating microplastics are for them? Like, is it actually killing them, or is it just slowing down to lifespan?
Yeah, so the microplastics that we found in that study were not only in the water column itself, but they were also found in the prey. So over time, there may be some sort of accumulation, either like in the stomachs, or somewhere that would affect those whales. I don't know, at least with gray whales, if we've looked at that yet. But yeah, it definitely is possible. And we've probably seen with other species, especially like certain, marine turtles, for example, that they do, often can get full of plastic in their stomach. So we're not exactly sure, or at least I'm not exactly sure what that story is with microplastics, but yeah, it's definitely possible.
It's a curious question. So you mentioned in your presentation that there's research that the cetaceans are like at a low level, and so that's possibly causing
the mortality of the whales. Do you think that maybe a conservation effort into the future, for research would be to use fish hatcheries to produce like this type of food and kind of disperse it? Is that even possible? Because I kind of like, your presentation kind of brought up concern, and so I was, thinking like, what can we do to like help the whales and thrive?
Yeah, so when it comes to food, like I said, mysids like are often used to like feed different species in aquariums. I don't know if anyone's necessarily like created like a food drop hatchery system for gray whales, but I do know that through conservation of different habitats, like some of our kelp forests and our rocky reefs, a lot of the species, with protection and conservation will, sort of bounce back. Or at least, the community will change themselves. Other than that, I think food-wise, a lot of that is driven by the changing environment. So whether that's temperature, like I talked about, there's also other things like upwelling and winds and currents. And so that food specifically is driven by a lot, larger things that have to do with climate change and global warming.
What will the El Nino year do for the whale population?
Yeah, so when we previously had the rain heat wave, at least from a food perspective, a lot of those communities changed. So at least in Oregon, when I was at Oregon State University, that's sort of the timing of when that happened. And so in the research that we found there, we found that some of the prey, the species that made up those larger communities or swarms was changing as well. And we don't necessarily know what that looked like quality or quantity wise, but it definitely is possible that with the warmer temperatures, more of these species and the communities that make up, so the snails, the amphipods, all of that could change, and that could, affect the larger quality and quantity as well. So it is possible.